Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. We're going to be tackling a really big one today.
Oh, yeah?
The executive branch of the U.S. government.
Huge topic.
It is, and we've got just a ton of different sources we're going to be looking at today. We've got some official government websites, we've got some historical articles, even some materials that are kind of designed for younger audiences.
Okay.
So hopefully we can really get like a...
Yeah, paint a full picture.
Yeah, paint a full picture of...
A broad view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we say executive branch, just to kind of like set the stage here,
Sure.
what are we even talking about?
Well, I think most people, when they hear executive branch, they immediately think of the president.
Right.
But it's so much more than that.
Yeah, and I think even for me, I get like the basic idea,
Right.
like it's the part of the government that's supposed to make sure that laws are actually like, followed,
Right.
not just written down on a piece of paper.
Right.
But
Put into practice.
yeah, how does that actually work?
Right.
In a country as big and complicated as the United States.
Well, and that's where I think your structure of the executive branch comes in.
Okay.
You've got the president, obviously, at the top, and then the vice president, and then all the cabinet members.
Right.
And heads of independent agencies.
Uh-huh.
It's a huge network.
Yeah.
And it's designed that way for a reason.
And that's where I think we start to see that whole like checks and balances thing come into play.
For sure.
Right? Like the founding fathers,
They didn't want a king?
they did not want a king. So
Yeah.
they were like, okay, let's spread the power out as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Then doesn't that make it
Yeah.
really hard to get anything done?
I mean, it can.
I mean, just imagine all those different people trying to agree on like anything.
Yeah, and sometimes it can feel very inefficient.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that those checks and balances are not just about preventing
Okay.
one person or one group from having too much power.
Right.
They're also about making different parts of the government work together.
Oh, so it's like a constant negotiation.
Exactly.
Push and pull between different viewpoints and ideas.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Like a good example is the president's veto power.
Okay, so the president can say no
Right.
to a law that Congress has passed.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's a pretty significant check on the legislature.
Right.
But then Congress can override that veto if they have enough votes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it prevents the president from just being a dictator.
So it really is like
It's a back and forth.
back and forth.
It's a dynamic system.
Okay, so it's not just like gridlock city all the time.
Not all the time, no.
I'm actually looking at some resources right now from the Truman Library.
Okay.
And just like reading through the list of responsibilities that the president has.
Yeah.
It's kind of making my head spin.
It's a lot.
It is like being the leader of the nation, working with Congress, commanding the military.
Crafting the budget.
Yeah, crafting the budget. I mean, how does one person even manage all of that?
It's a very, very demanding job.
I can imagine.
And to be honest, the president doesn't handle everything single-handedly.
Right.
That's why they have that whole structure we were talking about,
Right.
the cabinet, the agencies.
All the advisors.
All the advisors,
They're-
all those people are there to help and to advise the president.
But even with all that help, the president still has like a ton of power.
Oh, yeah.
So like what's to stop them from just doing whatever they want?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Okay.
We got to talk about executive orders.
Okay, hold on. Executive orders. I always thought those were like,
Yeah.
for like wartime emergencies.
I think people associate them with that, but
yeah.
they can be used in a lot of different situations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, responding to crises,
Oh, okay.
advancing policy goals.
So it's kind of like a tool in the president's toolbox.
You could think of it that way.
Yeah.
But here's the key.
Okay.
The judicial branch, the courts, they have the power to review those executive orders,
Right.
and they can declare them unconstitutional.
So even with an executive order,
Exactly.
it's not just like a blank check.
No, it's not a blank check.
Okay.
And history is full of examples of this.
Right, like Lincoln suspending habeas corpus
Exactly.
during the Civil War, or FDR in the Japanese internment camps.
Yeah, those were executive orders.
And they were definitely controversial.
Absolutely, and for good reason.
Yeah.
They sparked huge debates about, the balance of power.
Right.
What should be placed on the president's authority.
Yeah. It's a good reminder of why those checks and balances we were talking about are so important.
Yeah, they're crucial.
Because, the courts can step in,
Right.
Congress can push back,
Absolutely.
and ultimately the people have the power to, hold the executive branch accountable
Through elections.
through election.
Right.
Okay, this is actually a perfect transition to something that I found
Okay.
while I was poking around on the Obama White House archives.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's from whitehouse.gov,
Uh-huh.
and they have this list of 15 executive departments.
Oh, wow.
And just the sheer variety is kind of incredible.
Yeah, it really shows you how vast the executive branch is.
Yeah, we've got everything from the Department of Agriculture
Right.
to Veterans Affairs to transportation to education. I mean,
It's everything.
it's everything. And some of the details are just wild.
Oh, yeah.
Like, did you know that the Department of the Interior manages 1/5 of all the land in the U.S.?
Wow, that's a lot of land.
That is a lot of land. And the Department of Justice, it's essentially the biggest law firm in the entire world.
Never thought about it that way.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is.
And what's so interesting is that, you know, these departments, they're not just these, like, abstract entities. They're actually making decisions and policies that
impact everyone's lives.
Yeah, that impact our lives every single day.
Whether you realize it or not.
Whether we realize it or not.
That's right.
It's so easy to forget that, like, I don't really think about the Department of Agriculture when I'm, you know, buying groceries.
Right.
But they're the ones who are setting food safety standards.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, or the Department of Education.
Right.
Impacting what your kids are learning in school, or FEMA coordinating disaster relief when there's a hurricane.
Wow.
I mean, these departments are woven into the fabric of our life.
And this is where I start to get a little overwhelmed again, because
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Like, the Truman Library website even had this whole section on exploring all these different White House offices and agencies.
Right.
We're talking about everything from space exploration with NASA to drug enforcement with the DEA.
It's amazing how many different agencies there are.
It is, and they're all like the operational arms of the executive branch.
Working tirelessly behind the scenes.
Working behind the scenes, yeah.
I think what we're seeing here is that the executive branch isn't just about the president.
Right.
It's this incredibly complex system.
It really is.
Designed to manage a nation of over 300 million water.
Okay, I think I need a minute to process all of this.
Yeah, take a moment.
What about you, listener? What's standing out to you so far in this deep dive?
Yeah, what are you thinking about?
What questions are popping up for you?
Is it the sheer scope of the president's responsibilities?
Right.
Or the way checks and balances play out in practice?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just realizing how much these departments we've been talking about actually impact your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, take a moment.
Yeah, let it sink in.
Let it all sink in, because it's a lot to digest.
It is.
But it's all really important for understanding how this country actually works.
How this country runs. Yeah.
Yeah, and now that we've kind of laid the groundwork and explored the structure a little bit, I think it's time to delve into some specific examples of how the executive branch actually exercises its power.
Okay.
And what implications that has for all of us.
You know, I love a good real-world example.
Let's get into it.
This is where things get really interesting.
Exactly.
All right, let's unpack this even further.
Let's do it.
All right, you mentioned real-world examples. Let's get specific.
Okay.
What are some ways that, like, the executive branch's actions have a direct impact on people's lives?
Well, we were just talking about executive orders.
Right.
And those aren't just like historical footnotes, you know?
Right.
They can have very real and immediate consequences.
Okay.
So let's think about the EPA, for example.
Okay, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency.
Right.
They're in charge of, like, environmental regulations.
Exactly.
I feel like I vaguely remember learning about them in school.
Yeah, and a lot of those regulations are based on laws that Congress passes. But the president can use executive orders to influence how those laws are actually implemented.
Okay.
So, like, how strict the EPA is, what their priorities are.
So a president who is really concerned about climate change could use an executive order to push for, like, stricter emissions standards for cars.
Exactly.
Even if Congress hadn't specifically passed a law about that?
That's right.
Wow, okay.
Or on the flip side, a president who really prioritizes economic growth over environmental concerns might use an executive order to, like, ease regulations on certain industries, even if those industries are known polluters.
And then those decisions have, like, a ripple effect, right?
Yeah, they do.
Like, businesses have to prices might change for consumers.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's all connected.
And it really highlights that interplay between the different branches of government.
Right.
You know, Congress might pass a law with really good intentions, but the way the executive branch interprets and enforces that law can completely change its impact on the ground.
It's like they say the devil's in the details, or in this case, maybe the president's in the details.
You could say that, yeah.
So we were talking earlier about some of those, like, historically significant executive orders and how some of them are really controversial.
Right.
And those are, like, really stark examples of how power, even when it's intended for good, can be misused.
Absolutely.
Like Lincoln suspending habeas corpus, or FDR and the Japanese internment camps.
Those were really tough decisions.
Yeah.
And they sparked important debates about, you know, the balance of power, about individual rights versus national security, about what limits, if any, there should be on the president's authority.
Yeah, it's a good reminder of why those checks and balances are so crucial.
So crucial.
Because the courts can step in, Congress can push back.
Exactly.
And ultimately, the people have the power to hold the executive branch accountable.
Through elections.
Right, through elections.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic system, for sure.
It is constantly evolving.
Constantly evolving.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study.
Right.
But it also means that, we as citizens need to stay informed.
Right.
And engaged.
Because this isn't just like some theoretical thing.
No, it's not.
The executive branch is made up of people making decisions that impact our lives.
Exactly.
I'm hearing a theme here. Knowledge is power.
It is.
The more we understand how this complex system works, the better equipped we are to actually participate in our democracy.
Absolutely. We can't just passively consume the news.
Right.
We need to dig deeper.
Right.
Understand the nuances. Use our voices to hold our leaders accountable.
Because at the end of the day, the executive branch is supposed to be serving the people.
That's the idea.
Right? That's the ideal.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the president, we've talked about executive orders, we've talked about this vast network of departments and agencies.
It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in.
I think it's helpful sometimes to zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
And think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like, what does all of this mean for our understanding of the executive branch as a whole?
That's a great point. What are like the key takeaway here?
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway is that the executive branch isn't this distant, monolithic entity.
Okay.
It's a complex system made up of individuals, departments, and agencies, all working within this framework of checks and balances. And every decision, every action has consequences that ripple throughout our society.
So it's not just about the president.
It's not just about the president.
Even though they get most of the attention.
Yeah, they're a powerful figure.
Right.
But they're not acting in a vacuum.
Right.
They're surrounded by advisors, cabinet members,
agency heads,
all these other individuals who contribute to that decision-making process.
And all of those decisions are ultimately aimed at carrying out the laws and serving the needs of the people.
At least that's the idea.
At least that's the idea.
Right.
But as we've seen, the reality can be messy.
It can be.
There's always competing interests, political pressures, the potential for both progress and missteps.
Absolutely.
Which is why it's so important for us to be informed and engaged citizens.
It is.
We can't just sit back and expect the government to magically function perfectly.
No, we have a role to play.
We have a role to play in holding our leaders accountable.
And that starts with understanding how the system works.
Right.
Its strengths, its weaknesses, and its potential for both good and harm.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
yeah,
what's the one thing you want our listener to really think about?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to remember that the executive branch, like all branches of government, is a reflection of us, the people.
Okay.
It's shaped by our values, our priorities, and our choices.
Right.
So if you want a government that truly represents your interests, you need to be an active participant in the process.
Okay.
Stay informed, engage in dialogue, and make your voice heard.
I love that it's a call to action.
This
has been a fascinating exploration of the executive branch, but it's really just the beginning.
It is just the beginning.
There's so much more to learn.
So much more.
To discuss and to ponder.
Absolutely.
And we encourage you to do just that.
Yes.
Keep digging, keep questioning.
Keep learning.
And keep challenging yourself to understand the complexities of our government.
Because ultimately, the more informed and engaged we are as citizens, the better equipped we are to shape the future we want to see.
Well said. Now, we've talked about a lot of big picture stuff.
We have.
But I'm curious to get back to those individual departments and agencies.
Yeah.
They might not be as flashy as the president.
Right.
But their work has a huge impact on our lives.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth taking a closer look at a few of them.
Okay.
To really illustrate how the executive branch reaches into so many different aspects of our society.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we're zooming back in.
Yeah.
On those departments and agencies.
Right.
Where do we even begin?
I know, right? There are so many.
There are so many.
How about we pick a few that have a really tangible impact on everyday life?
Okay.
So the Department of Transportation, for example.
Okay, the Department of Transportation.
They're responsible for everything from highway safety to regulating airlines.
Okay, the Department of Transportation, yeah. I definitely have some opinions about their work, especially when I'm stuck in traffic.
I think we all do.
But seriously, though, they're the ones behind those big infrastructure projects we hear about all the time, right?
Absolutely.
Bridges, roads, public transit.
Yep, and their decisions have a ripple effect on the economy, on commute times, on the environment.
Right.
Like, for example, they're currently investing a lot in electric vehicle charging stations.
Oh, wow.
Which could have a major impact on the future of transportation and our reliance on fossil fuels.
It's a great example of how, a seemingly boring government department is actually, shaping the future.
They are.
Okay, what about another one?
Let's talk about the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay, Health and Human Services.
This one's huge.
Okay.
It includes the FDA, the CDC.
Oh, wow.
the National Institutes of Health.
Okay.
Just to name a few.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
So I'm guessing their work impacts pretty much everyone?
Yeah, pretty much everyone in some way.
In some way.
They're responsible for regulating food and drug safety.
Okay.
For conducting research on diseases.
Right.
And administering programs like Medicare and Medicaid.
Wow, okay.
So think about it.
Yeah.
Everything from the medications you take to the nutritional labels on your food is influenced by the work of this department.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
What's that?
These departments, they might not be as visible as the president.
Right.
But they're like quietly working behind the scenes to keep the country running smoothly.
And safely.
And safely.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's making me think about that Truman Library website we mentioned earlier. They had this whole task for us to like explore all these different
White House offices and agencies.
White House offices and agencies, yeah.
Right, and how diverse those agencies are.
And remember how diverse they were.
Right.
You've got NASA pushing the boundaries of space exploration, the DEA combating drug trafficking, the Securities and Exchange Commission regulating financial markets. I mean,
the list goes on and on.
It goes on and on.
It does.
It's kind of amazing to think about all the different things that the executive branch is responsible for.
It really is.
It's like this giant interconnected machine.
It is.
With all these moving parts.
And that's why understanding the executive branch is so important.
Right.
It's not just about knowing who the president is.
Right, or what their latest tweet was.
Exactly. It's about recognizing this vast network of individuals and organizations who are working to implement laws, provide services, and shape the future of our nation.
This has been a real eye-opener for me.
It has been for me too.
And hopefully for our listener as well.
I hope so.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final thought you want to leave our listener with?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I would just encourage everyone to stay curious.
Okay.
Don't just accept what you hear on the news or read on social media.
Right.
Dig deeper.
Yeah.
Explore the websites of these departments and agencies.
Okay.
Read about their history, their challenges, their successes.
So we can be more informed.
Exactly. Because the more we understand about how the executive branch works, the more empowered we are as citizens to hold our leaders accountable and shape the kind of government we want.
I love that. This has been a fascinating journey.
It has.
Through the complexities of the executive branch. But as we said before, it's really just the beginning.
It is just the beginning.
There's always more to learn, more to discover,
Absolutely.
more ways to engage with the world around us.
Exactly. Stay curious, stay engaged.
And keep diving deep.
That's it for this deep dive, everyone. Thanks for joining us.